All right, so it's just loading. But yeah, feel free to take it away, Cindy.
Okay, well, I'm so excited to be here tonight. One of my friends has got a talk going on, and she's actually talking to a bunch of bureaucrats, and I remember I by far a better time. So I just want to say how grateful I am for the invitation. I'm having my chai tea as promised, and I spent my morning actually having a COVID test because I'm hoping to be able to go and help out my mom. So, but I got to make sure that I'm not bringing the virus to her. So that was my morning, and then caulking my patio door. So not too exciting, but this is by far the high point of what I wanted to do, is to kind of spend some time with each of you. And I'm joining you from unceded Algonquin territory. And what I thought I'd talk just briefly about, and then we can have a really good conversation, is about how do you do advocacy? Or at least how did we figure out how to do advocacy? Because when we filed the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal case against Canada, to be honest, we didn't have any idea what we were doing. Right? I mean, we'd see people do stuff, but how do you actually create a campaign, and how do you succeed, especially when the lives of so many other people are at stake? Like, messing up on this case would have really, we really would done some damage to these children. So we wanted to try and bring our best to it. So this is a picture of Amanda, Indigenous animator and her team. They're doing an animation of Spirit Bear's book, so that'll be coming out soon. But as you can see, we have like the kids really out there protesting along with Spirit Bear. So all of these stories really based on true story of diversities came together to press the Canadian government to end the inequalities in First Nations public services. But I wanted to start out talking about colonialism. And I know that we've been talking a lot in the media about structural racism. And I think the two of them have a bit of an overlay. And this definition I just found was so helpful to me. And it's by Eduardo Galeano, who's a Uruguayan journalist. And he says blatant colonialism mutilates you without pretense. It forbids you to talk, it forbids you to act, it forbids you to exist. But invisiblism, however, convinces you that serfdom is your destiny and impotence is your nature. It convinces you that it's not possible to speak, not possible to act, and not possible to exist. And for me, I think the most devastating type of colonialism is that invisible colonialism, in that it normalizes what ought not be normal experiences for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And I think if we substituted in the word structural racism into this and systemic racism, we'd find that the very similar kind of pattern. And what Galeano talks about is, he says, colonialism isn't just what you see, like we saw with the Wet'suwet'en, the pipeline wanting to go through their territory. That's the visible one, but it's what you don't see. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. This is US healthcare spending. We know that the Navajo have the highest per capita rate of COVID infection in the United States. That's not a surprise, because when you look at the US government's federal health spending, they spend money for healthcare for prisoners, federal incarcerated prisoners, that is, for the US military and for Native Americans. You can see the overwhelming disparity here. I didn't put the military on there because they're far higher than the 673 per capita that a federally incarcerated prisoner receives. But in comparison, Native Americans only receive $1,297 per person on healthcare spending. So it's really a miracle that the Navajo reservation has been able to keep the rates down to the highest level in the United States based on that type of inequality. And you don't hear this being talked about in the narrative of why the kids are so high there. We do hear comments about 30% of the homes not having water, but not about the federal health deficit. And here's another more contemporary one. And this has to do with deaths by law enforcement. This is data by the Center for Disease Control in 2016. And as you can see, Native Americans are the most likely group to be killed by law enforcement in the United States. And yet, as we're seeing the rich dialogue and important dialogue about Black Lives Matter, I haven't actually seen one sign, and I've been watching carefully to see actually some notes that the Native Americans are actually more likely to die per capita from police shootings. And this similar data maps over into Canada. And I think we need to be very careful about just using kind of broad stroke definitions, because the experiences are different. And that doesn't take away at all from the travesty of what's happening to Black Americans. It just says we have to pay attention to what's happening with Native Americans. So that to me is more like the silent colonialism. But for these persons and for their families, of course, it's an absolute tragedy and real. Now, I hear a lot of calls for inquests and studies and royal commissions, and now I actually shirk because there's so many of these things on the books. Our problem isn't that we don't have answers. The problem is that the federal and provincial governments choose not to implement the answers that are already on the books. I think about the good work you did at A7G about the TC's call staff number 66. You put in all of that work. The answers are there. The federal government just simply has to realize them. And having another study about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit young people isn't really going to do much. What they need to do is really grab hold of those recommendations in partnership with Métis, First Nations, and Inuit young people and implement them. And these are reports on welfare. So I just listed some of the highlights, and you can see they go back to 1895. And the recommendations are pretty consistent. Treat kids equitably, make sure they're culturally based, and empower their communities to care for them. So we had the solutions. We knew that First Nations kids on reserve were getting shortchanged by the federal government. We filed this case. We had $50,000 in the bank. The federal government cut us within 30 days. We're still the only national organization that gets money from the federal government, other than probably you. But we're completely funded by non-government sources. But I didn't have a strong knowledge of how to do advocacy. But I come from the Gitxsan Nation, and I can't remember if it was Samantha or Harmony was talking about mosquitoes, but I grew up around a lot of them in the bush. And I was trying to think of an animal that's really tiny, but tends to have a huge impact on things that are much bigger than it. And the Caring Society only had 2 full-time staff. That's actually true to up until today. We only have 2 full-time staff. So how does something small make a big impact? So we came up with this model called mosquito advocacy. And the first thing we looked at is the mosquito is targeted. It doesn't sit around wringing its hands thinking, oh, should I start? It knows exactly what it needs to do in order to sustain the species. And that is to get blood. So for the first thing you need to think about is, what is the first solution that will problems, but makes solving the problems possible? So in the case of the Caring Society, we really believe that communities are in the best position to make good decisions for their kids. They have the solutions. What they don't have is the resources. So we thought we're going to try and go for equitable resources and make those available at the grassroots level and see what that happens. The second is mosquitoes are infectious, and they have an infectious message. Sometimes you can have a really good cause, but people don't understand it. Like even when we use the word treaties, the average person on the street doesn't know what that means. So I'm going to talk in a minute about how you create an infectious message and actually how you can do that for free. And there's a great guy called George Lakoff who we're going to get into. The other, and of course, that's key to social movements, and that's getting outside of your own niche. So if you're finding it's always the same people coming to your gatherings, then your movement isn't expanding. You should actually be going to places where no one knows you And so that you can learn new ideas, but also so you can infect them with your solutions. The other thing is buzz, which all of you are really great at A7G, which is to make sure you don't just have a day of action, but there's a constant buzz around the people who can make the change. So in our case, it's around Trudeau and government. We want them to constantly have this stuff in their face and to have it from all different types of directions. Just like one buzzing mosquito in a tent, you can actually create movement to something much bigger than you just by being a bit irritating, but in a respectful way. And then Swarm is using multiple strategies. Mosquitoes come at them. And this would be my critique about things like roadblocks, because they're so predictable now that the government knows how to deal with them. And a roadblock can be effective if it's nested in other strategies. If it's not, it's probably not going to have the impact you like. And then finally, mosquitoes bite. Peaceful but binding action that is listed in public education. For us, tribunal. That's a model. So you have had interest in mosquitoes. So just think about them as we go through this. Oops. I want to just go to what that first domino solution is and why equity is so important. This is a model we came up with at the Pan American Health Organization. And I find it really useful because it actually acknowledges the land as a determinant of health and acknowledges colonialism and structural racism as ongoing factors in the determinants of health. But the closest thing, if you wanted to, for example, reduce youth suicide, and you wanted to reduce juvenile justice overrepresentation, and you wanted to reduce murdered missing, and you needed to improve education outcomes, and you wanted to improve health outcomes, and decrease numbers in child welfare, and robust the economy, you can do all of that by reducing inequality in your own and in your nation. That's as close to a silver bullet as we have. And there's all kinds of ways of being able to show how it creates a free index that comes out every year where it ranks Canada in terms of its child rights implementation. This year we rank 54th in the world, even for a G7 country. But the key one, which is the sub-index of child rights environment on government budgets and legislation, we're down there at 130th and 40th in the world. The Russian Federation is doing better at letting money for children in yellow and children in Canada. It tells you how badly we're kind of waiting. This is another great data source for equity. It's called Gapminder, and they can do, like, you can go here and find out how much of a relationship is there between poverty in Canada and diabetes, or poverty in Canada and mental health. And they have some awesome videos here that are free of charge that explain everything. I just really highly recommend you check it out. And also EcoSoc has a free database which has all of Canada's equity data in it. So if you ever 70, you can find it all online or on EcoSoc. The other thing I ask people to think about is like, what is the you have that you can contribute to justice? And there's this great book called The Element by Ken Robinson, pardon me. There's the book beside Spirit Bear here. And basically, it's a very long, many elders taught me over the years, which is that each one of us has a gift. And that gift or element isn't just something you're good at, because sometimes we're good at things that we don't really like doing. I'm not bad at caulking my patio door. Do I like it? No, it's not my element. Your element or your gift is when you're very good at something, but you're also very passionate about it. So time itself stops. That's what you should be gifting in it, or to the world more generally. So if it's culinary, if it's mathematics, it doesn't matter what it is. that can all be used as a just tool. So when I'm organizing campaigns, I try to figure out with people what is their element and give a task related to that, instead of just having a bunch of sit on a flip chart and then asking people to volunteer. So it's a fun way to do it. There's a YouTube video on the, you can go check it out. And the book is excellent and it's only about 100 pages. So I also recommend that. Get it at Chapters. I have one in my office if you want to borrow it. So you know the mosquito advocacy, you know that equity, if you can tie your campaign to equity, that you're going to get big bang for the buck. You have determined your element and the elements of people in your group, but you're going to go nowhere without moral courage. And moral courage is the courage thing when you can take a personal or professional hit. And it's important to know the moral courageous in ways that bring honor those that you're standing with. So to use the Black Lives Matter, the people who had moral courage, the White House, before they started, the White House started throwing the tear gas. The other people who are rioting and doing that stuff, they don't have moral courage because they're not acting for communal benefit and bring honor to the movement. But this whole YouTube channel has free examples of people who are moral courageous every day. And the thing about moral courage is it doesn't come naturally. So you got to practice it. And they're like 2 to 3 minute vignettes of people of all walks of life. All of you could be on there, I have no doubt. But unfortunately, these are just Americans for this point, but it really helps you to be more aware of moral courage and help you practice it. You're on public transit and hear something that's inappropriate, or whether it's around your family dinner table or whatever, this will help you nourish your moral courage so that you can stand up, so that in the big campaign. And this is the framing thing on the infectious message. So for years, I was out there talking to people about the inequalities for First Nations kids, and nobody, it felt like, was listening. But then I realized I was telling it in a terribly boring way. I felt I had to get even more detailed in my statistics to show people, and more detailed in the economic arguments, when it was actually the opposite. What I needed to do is follow this book. And it's called Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff. It says, nest your message in 5 universal values. So just to give an example, equality, freedom, those kinds of things are believed in by any culture around the world. They might look different. They're fundamental human values. The more you nest your message within those, the better. Second point, make sure it's simple and that it's not an official procedure. Never call for a national inquiry because you may get it and then they'll never act on the recommendations. You have to create a vision about where you want to go. So after we read Lakoff's book at the Caring Society, we came with First Nation kids getting a fair chance to grow up safely in their families, get a good education, be healthy and proud of who they are. So that's our message, and that's something everybody can understand. It's very hard to argue against. We actually had it passed in those words at House of All Parties, and although they didn't implement it, it was good to cite in our legal case. So having something simple that affordable that's important is key. The other thing about the book is he says side, and that's why the title of the book is so important. When you're arguing the other side, you don't use their language. So if I asked you all to don't think of an elephant, you're all thinking of elephants. It's just natural. So picking up the language of the other side actually reinforces the other side. That's why I really try hard not to use the federal government's word engagement. I use consultation all the time. They want you to use engagement because it's non-legally binding. we want to use consultation because it is legally binding. So again, that book's at your bookstore, and it's like, I think, $2. And some help, there's a group in it's called Frameworks, and they have so you can go on there, say if you're interested in who are incarcerated, you can go on there and look at what other people have come up with frames, and then use that as a basis for your own. And yeah, I go on there actually. So, and then when you do the bite, you have to be prepared for backfire. And I know that you guys have experienced that with your work on the Wet'suwet'en. And this article is really helping it to tell you how it's gonna come. One is the famous cover up, right? That's like Trump saying, well, there was loads of people in the stadium when there was only 6. Evaluation of the target. This happens a lot in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit activism, where power players, corporations, or governments target one person in the movement to discredit the entire movement. Intimidation and bribery, and this actually, I think, happens quite a bit too, in that the federal government will give you the impression that if you challenge them, you won't get funding. And this is a huge problem. And I think it's allowed for the normalization of inequality. Re-enter facts, that happens all the time. We're the federal government saying, well, we're working hard, we're doing good first steps in ending these inequalities, when really they've been going on for 110 years. And with COVID coming out, it's always made obvious that it was always possible for them to do something. They chose not to do it. And here's the big: use an official procedure to mask action. It's the danger of a committee, of a MOU, of an inquiry. All those things are official procedures. And if they will use and offer those to try and mask an action on their part. This is a group, Frontline Defenders. They're in Dublin, and they're there to support frontline defenders. Know that A7G got some contact with them, although not the vigorous support I was hoping for, but they are out there. And here, I'm going to say that the critical you need to infectious message is, once you frame your message, you have to have things that the people can do to be able to act on the issue. And don't leave it very general. So on the Karen Society's website, we have 7 free ways to make a difference in under 2 minutes. And I really am a very strong believer that they need to pass in free for 2 reasons. If all you're doing is asking for donations, then you're leaving out the civic engagement of a lot of people. And most importantly, they're often the people who you want to benefit from the activism. And they have to be invited in. It's absolutely necessary. Second, some people don't have a lot of time. And we have barriers. There's a psychological barrier with mainstream folks. Sometimes they're worried about making a mistake, and then people get angry and things worse. So by just making it something quick and easy, but meaningful that they can do, it gets them over that hump, and often are willing to do more than that. So that's kind of the mosquito advocacy model in a very quick nutshell. But I'll leave it there. And I know that you guys are like amazing activists yourself. So we'll just now we can have some tea. Oh, look at, someone's been busy putting down all the resources. That's awesome.
Yeah, I just wanted to add those like little links so that people could easily, like you said, easily go to them and engage with them. Yeah, so what we usually do is we usually open it up for questions. Also, if folks have like personal questions that they don't want recorded, I can also stop the recording. So I just wanted to put that out there. but if you have questions that you don't mind being recorded, feel free to ask them now. You can also put them in the chat. You could raise your hand or just turn on your mic. But yeah, that was awesome, Cindy. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That really really like direct and tangible work. Oh, okay. You got Jody. Yeah, it's really important to have all of those really great ways to think about things. And I know a lot of us look up to you. So to see kind of like what you're reading and you know what things are helping you in the work that you're doing is really great. Yeah, does anyone have any questions right now?
Well, one thing I will say is that I really believe strongly, of course, involving kids. When we entered into the scene in 2000, there was youth engagement. It wasn't being done well. It wasn't being done to the extent it needs to be done. But there was like zero child engagement. And so we really feel like by including children, by educating them on what contemporary inequalities are, what the roots are for history, that's why Spirit Bearers books are so important. And then by giving kids actual things that they can do that are loving and respectful in order to make that change, that we're raising a whole generation of kids who can be much better at activism, much better at detecting systemic discrimination. And I will tell you, a little secret there, hopefully we'll be able to say it publicly, but we just had an evaluation done on our campaigns. Now we could only have teachers' impressions of them, but it was really quite encouraging because what the teachers were saying is that the kids are becoming more compassionate when they're getting involved in the campaigns. They're excited to make a difference, and they're actually taking those skills and applying them to other social injustices. So it's just what we hope for. They have some ideas on how we can improve too by kind of revamping our website a bit and adding a few more teacher resources. So we'll be doing that over time. But a group like A7G has so much to offer little kids. And the key to engaging kids, of course, is just really basing your campaign on love, really basing your campaign on truth, and having a fun imagination. You know, come up with something like Spirit Bear. It's a lot more fun to hang around with than, you know, I am, for example.
I feel like you're fun to hang around with. I feel like some of our other like guests on Tea and Chat have been like kind of like different approach to the Tea and Chat, but I feel like this is how you would actually transfer knowledge to us if we were sitting down for a Tea and Chat. It was really informative.
Yeah, well, I saw Christy Belcourt on there and I thought, darn, they didn't let me know Christy Belcourt was on there. I love Christy Belcourt. So it was great to have a little bit of
Thanks so much for joining this Tea and Chat. I'm going to turn the live off right now, and then we could get into, we could talk a little bit more.